Right. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Maher. I'm with Risk Management Professionals, and welcome to our continuing series on PSM and RMP activities. This is an outgrowth of our technical efforts on site. Most of you know we're process safety management consultants, and as such, we've got a lot of technical issues that we get involved with, and this is part of our technical outreach program to share these things as part of our webinar series. Before we get started, actually, before well, I know I got to click this first. All right, there we go. Does that work? All right, good. All right, before we get started, a little bit of logistics. We're using a GoToWebinar interface. What that means is that we're broadcasting live. We've also got an image of the speaker on the left side of your screen, and also an image of the slides on the right. Those images can be moved around. They can be resized with your mouse. And also, if you'd like to contact our producer, Sarah Willman, basically what you can do is use your little, what's the proper name for the chat box? The questions box. Use your questions box if you want to post questions, have comments to add. And later on at the end when we do our QA session, that's a great way to get any questions you might have sent to our producer, Sarah, and she can go ahead and reiterate those to me and my co-presenter, which I'll be introducing to you in a few minutes. But first of all, just a quick word on risk management professionals. As I mentioned, we're PSM RMP consultants. If you look at our main product lines, you'll notice a lot of the acronyms that are kind of new to some of the issues that we'll be discussing today, such as DMR, damage mechanism reviews, HCA, hierarchy of hazard control analysis, SPA, safeguard protection analysis. A lot of those things are really an outgrowth of process hazard analysis, or basically a little bit more depth in certain areas for PHA activities. And most of you know that our core competencies revolve around the PHA area. Most of heavy industry calls us for those things, whereas for folks who don't have an entrenched program, call us in for a wide range of support on all the different PSM and RMP elements. So these PHA fortes are what we will use as a building block to help share with you some of the new issues that have come up in the regulatory arena that apply to California refineries. So let me go ahead and introduce the topic, which I kind of did already, and also the presenters. Basically what we want to do is talk about PSM and RMP modernization programs in California. Many of you have been following this, realize that the effective date for the CalARP Program 4 requirements that apply to California refineries is October 1st, 2017, and that's in tandem with the effective date of the California PSM requirements for refineries 5189.1, a separate regulation from 5189 that basically applies to everybody else. They're called modernization. We're characterizing these as modernization programs because they are updating the regulations, these regulatory requirements for California refineries. But the reality is a lot of these techniques have been around for a long time. And realistically, although they're given different acronyms, they're given different names, and they're now codified, the fact is that a good process hazard analysis has really addressed a lot of these topics from the onset for decades. Anyhow, I'll be starting the presentation, and joining me will be Alex Metulev. And also, I should mention too that on the screen is a number to contact us, and somebody will try to help you if you're having any technical difficulties. A little bit about me. Been around the block a few times. I've got a couple of degrees, a couple of professional engineering certifications, and I've been dragged into some pretty impossible jobs that have been very challenging and have really had me sharpen my skills in a number of different areas. And these are the kind of things that we want to use as a basis to share information with you. Alex, he's a chemical engineer from the University of California in Irvine. He's done a lot of facilitation work, HAZOP and LOPA facilitation, dispersion modeling, P&ID development. He's done a lot of the issues revolving around PSM and RMP programs, and he's been my co-conspirator in terms of looking at some of the new regulatory requirements. And one of the things that we really want to share with you today is we put a lot of effort into going through and developing, trying to understand the schedule, the schedule requirements for a lot of the new elements of PSM and CalARP as it applies to refineries in California have some very specific schedule requirements. We did put together a large matrix for that. Alex is going to go through parts of that. And as your takeaways here, understanding these requirements, where they apply, and provide and hopefully getting some useful information by encapsulating a lot of the schedule requirements that are a lot more complicated than previous PSM and RMP and CalARP requirements are going to be very important. Anyhow, I hope those are useful to you. And also what I'd like to ask the audience is this stuff is new. We can't put everything into a simple matrix. So if you see any errors or improvements to make, please let us know. If we did make any mistakes, I'd like to go ahead and reissue that and make that useful for everybody. So anyhow, the key topics, I'd like to start out with a little bit of an overview of the program elements, how things overlap, what these new initiatives are, what the impact is on facilities. Alex will be talking about a little bit more detail on the elements and schedule requirements. And I'd like to then rejoin the webinar and talk about some of the impact and strategies that you might use to encapsulate these pretty easily. So let's talk about where we are and what applies to your facility. If you look at this is a slide that encapsulates a lot of the history of the evolution of PSM and RMP programs, offshore, onshore in the United States, and offshore and onshore and outside the United States. In the upper right-hand corner, we'll get into more detail about that in a few minutes, is basically the recent promulgation and setting the effective date of the new requirements in California for refineries of October 1st. The interesting thing about all these different programs is whether you're onshore, whether you're offshore, whether you're looking at what happened in the 80s, whether you're looking at what was going on currently, it really brings you to a core set of management system elements. There we go. A core set of management system elements that is really designed to manage the degree of safety at your facility. Now, we're going to be talking about a lot of changes. This is what applies right now up through September 30th for all facilities in the United States that are governed by PSM and RMP. You can see the extreme level of overlap. For those of you who are not in California and who aren't an owner and operator of a refinery, this is the way it's going to stay for a while. The new elements that we're going to be discussing apply to California refineries only. So why are California refineries being treated separately, and why do they have some new requirements? A lot of people have asked that, and a lot of that is based on some things that have occurred in recent history and a lot of the developments of regulations associated with this. Now, I've included two photographs here that you probably recognize from the tragedy in West Texas, the city of West in Texas, and also the fire that occurred in Richmond, California. The West Texas tragedy was something that did spur a lot of follow-up at the federal level. However, at this point in time, those are basically being put on ice. The EPA's RMP updates have been pushed off, have been queued for further investigation, further review by the EPA, and right now they're looking at a February 19th, 2019 date for basically taking the next step. What the next step is really not known at this time, I believe, to anybody. So at the federal level, the OSHA, PSM, RFI follow-ups, and also the EPA updates that they put into a draft regulation. Actually, they tried, I think it was finalized for a little bit in January this year, but basically it's been pulled back for further review. And again, at the federal level, nothing's going to be done with that until 2019. Now in California, it's a different story. In fact, let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. There we go. Following the Richmond fire, the Chemical Safety Board, CSB, was right on that, and they did a pretty good job with their evaluation. They came up with several reports with some recommendations for improvement. It involved improvements at all levels, both at the regulatory arena and also for what industrial facilities might do. Those core set of recommendations and follow-up items were things that were picked up by the Interagency Refinery Task Force, various regulators in California, such as the CalEPA, California Office of Emergency Services, and also the CalOSHA, to basically take those, and they've been working over the past several years to try to develop a an update to their regulatory requirements as it applies to refineries. They saw refineries as the area that they wanted to focus on. And so what came of that is a program 4 requirement. And by the way, I'm not going to be talking more about EPA or OSHA at the federal level. We're going to strictly be focusing on California. So what's been going on over the past several years is a number of revisions, interaction between the agencies and also industry. And what's come out of that basically is various the final rulemaking which occurred this summer after legal review at the state level and setting an effective date of October 1st. Those regulations are available for download from our website, and also I'll be giving you a specific link for that in a few. In fact, let's go back for a second. On the handout that you've got, the band in yellow in the upper right-hand corner is a link to our website. And although the regulatory arena is rather dynamic, and there's obviously a lot of changes, we try to keep up with those. And you can use this link to try to get the latest copies, the latest information on what these updates, what's been going on with these updates. So that's where we're at right now. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Alex in just a couple minutes, but I do want to emphasize one thing. Before all the PSM and RMP coordinators out there run out of the webinar for the door to submit their resignation to their bosses so they can get out of this position, these new regulatory requirements that Alex is going to discuss only apply to California refineries. I've identified there's about a dozen facilities in California, and that's going to be the focal point for CalARP Program 4. That's the acronym in the upper left in the title block here. And also we're calling it CalPSM-R for California PSM requirements for refineries. That's located in section 5189. All right, that I hope sets the stage for things. Let me turn it over to Alex, and then I'll come back with some thoughts on how to proceed after Alex helps you out.
Thank you, Steve. Can you hear me okay? Everyone here? Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Alex. And like Steve mentioned, I will be going over the changes to the regulations. All right. I'm a little tall, apparently, for the camera.
That's all right. I'll get a box.
All right. So, there are a few different types of changes that we'll be going over. They fall into three different types. One is the elements. There's changes to the elements of the program. The next one is the facility and the program applicability. And then the final one is the schedule associated with the new programs. Now, the third one, the schedule, is one of the things that we've emphasized a little bit more in this presentation because of the October 1st initiation, I guess, promulgation date for the regulations. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is the current program. This has been out there for about 20 years now. You should be well aware of all the 14 different elements of the normal PSM program. What I want to discuss now are the changes to this circle, the changes to this this PSM program that is going to begin starting October 1st. A little bit of an explanation here. The items that have been green are minimal changes. Yellow is moderate changes, and then red are either new elements or it'll be a significant effort to comply with that element. That being said, this is what the program will look starting October 1st. I won't go over all of these elements, but briefly, some of the important changes, starting clockwise. PHAs, we have the addition of the SPAs, Safety Protection Analysis. We have ISDs, addition to ISDs, damage mechanism reviewers, hierarchy of hazard control analyses. Those are all added to the PHA after October 1st. Operating procedures, there's a few changes to require sections to the operating procedures. Mechanical integrity, the biggest thing here is the addition of damage mechanism reviews as part of mechanical integrity, which is the next section over. IST, HCA, and STAA. Inherently safer designs and hierarchy of hazard control analysis. This is a whole new element added that will overlap into both the mechanical integrity, the PHA, the incident investigation, all over the PSM program. MOCs, the addition of management of organizational change for MOCs. So now not only do you have to do an MOC every time you change something in the system, every time you have a significant organizational change within your facility, that requires a new MOC. Now significant changes can be things like changes to your staffing levels. Let's say you have 5 operators on the field and you go down to 3. How does that affect your system, and so on. Incident investigations, root cause analysis, addition of root cause analysis for any major incidents, emergency planning and response, addition of a whole new section for emergency planning and response that only applies to refineries, process safety culture assessment. It's the document you will have. This is a study you will have to perform, and then a document that you will need to develop as to the safety culture within your facility. Human factors, similar thing. You have to do human factor assessments and develop a whole program for human factors. We went over briefly of a management of organizational change, compliance audits. Compliance audits mostly on the federal level. There hasn't been many changes on the California level side. And process safety management program is a written program as to how you will manage all of your elements. How do you take care of your recommendation for your PHAs, your compliance audits? What are the significant items that you report on, that you look at for your safety performance, your indicators, and so on. Now, as I mentioned, the big focus on this will be the scheduling, starting with the new program. Now, this is an extensive list we've put together as to all the requirements and all the schedules and all the due dates starting October 1st. Now, this is mostly for your benefit. I won't go through the whole table, but we created this table just so you guys have it a reference, so it's easy for you to see what is due and when. A few things I want to go over, though, are process hazard analysis. So any process that was previously not regulated and is now regulated under the Program 4 regulations will need to have a PHA performed on by October 1st, 2020, which is 3 years from now, or 36 months. SPAs, you need to create SPAs within 6 months of completing any PHAs. And then there's still the 5-year revalidation cycle on all of your PHAs. Moving on, some other important things to mention, DMRs. You need to complete all your DMRs, damage mechanism reviews, prior to your PHAs and prior to changes affecting any chemistry, metallurgy, or operating limits. All your DMRs need to be finished within 5 years or by October 1st, 2022, and 50% need to be finished within 3 years or October 1st, 2020. And there's a 5-year revalidation on all DMRs. And you also have to review DMRs as part of your incident investigation and as part of your MOCs. Inherently safer design technologies and hierarchy of hazard control analysis. Now, this is a whole webinar in itself. Inherently safer design, how do you implement that within a PHA study? That's a whole webinar in itself. However, for all of those need to be performed by October 1st, 2022, within 5 years, and also 50% by 2020, or 3 years from October 1st. It has a 5-year validation cycle, and then it needs to be implemented for any recommendation addressing a major hazard potential. You have 90 days to create a report following recommendation completion. And same thing for any major incidents, major change, new processes, or any time that UPA requests it. Following that, there is some gray point, it looks like, in emergency planning and response. The regulations that are out there, the draft regulations, have some discrepancies in terms of the requirements for emergency response. mainly the fact that the emergency response section seems to be missing from the regulations, so that is still pending for future changes. Moving on, MOCs, you have to complete MOC for any changes that are bigger than 90 days, that will last longer than 90 days, organizational changes within your facility. Human factors, you have to create your program, human factors program, within 18 months following promulgation, so April 1st, 2019. 50% of assessments need to be done within 2 years, or October 1st, 2019, and all of the assessments need to be done within 3 years, October 1st, 2020. And then process safety management program. Now this gives a lot more updates on creation of process safety performance indicators. Within a year of promulgation, you need to, or within 6 months of promulgation, you need to create all of your safety performance indicators, and then you have to report on those on June 30th every year following that. So June 30th starting 2019, you have to report all your process safety performance indicators for the previous year. And a few other requirements as well. So another important thing is to submit findings and recommendations to the owner within 40 days of completion of said recommendation. Moving on. Like I said, this is a table for your benefit, and it's a good idea to print this table out and have it handy so you can understand what the deadlines you have coming up are. Now Steele will come back in and talk about the status impacts and strategies of the program. Thank you.
Mike, good. All right, Alex, thank you. Yeah, we did trying to sort through some of the scheduler impacts. Was about as difficult as some of the technical requirements too. These are things that can come up and bite you. If we didn't pick up on, we titled the scheduler items as key scheduler requirements because there are other nuances in the regulations. You have to know these very well. You have to be very careful of this. It'd be really easy to get tripped up right now, so you want to be very familiar with the regulatory requirements. We also color coded the table too, to identify things that are minimally changed from the previous regulatory requirements as they apply to California requirements, California refineries, versus things that are going to have a more significant impact. So anyhow, I hope you find it useful. If you do have any feedback, we'd appreciate it. So let's talk about, again, quickly where we're at right now is there have been a lot of changes. A lot of different agencies got involved, and it's evolved from a situation for California refineries from this into something quite a bit more complicated with a lot more different elements. But there's some good news about that I'll share with you in a couple of minutes. First and foremost, I want to make it very clear. The image on your screen in terms of CalARP requirements, RMP requirements, PSM requirements for non-refineries in California stay the same. Other facilities that aren't in that SIC code for petroleum refineries do not have to make any dramatic change in how they're handling PSM, RMP, and CalARP. As long as you're compliant with the current program, you don't have to do anything totally different. But you need to be aware of what's going on. Don't get too cozy with this, because there have been a lot of things that are proposed that may get looked at as, or maybe become looked at as a best practice. So anyhow, again, the focus is on California refineries for the changes. Right now, what you see on the screen still applies for facilities outside California and facilities in California that are not petroleum refineries. Here's what the refineries have to be aware of starting October 1st, which is the effective date of the PSM for Cal PSM for refineries and CalARP Program 4. A lot of different colors, a lot of overlap. Let me explain this. There's also some complicating factors here with the federal RMP requirements that currently are going to be put on ice until 2019. In the blue circle, you're going to see several items in red. These items in red were slated for the updates or the key portions of the updates for the federal RMP program that are currently still being reviewed. These are not things that you need to worry about right now, but I've included these here because you might want to keep your eyes on what's going on. Compliance audit, third-party compliance audits, additional emergency response planning requirements, root cause analysis for incident investigations, and safer technologies and alternatives analysis are not required right now by federal RMP requirements for facilities that are encompassed by those. Now, back to California refineries. In the pink, you see the Cal PSM for refineries, 5189.1 requirements, and in yellow, CalARP Program 4. Essentially, there have been a lot of efforts made, a lot of meetings with their interagency refinery working task force, and also the various agencies involved to synchronize these as much as possible. There are differences, primarily in terms of where things are located, and also some management system differences. For example, the CalARP Program 4 requirements allow the UPA that's the agency that's administering the CalARP program in California, to post copies of incident investigation, hierarchy of hazard control analysis on their website for public viewing. We've also got, in terms of CalARP Program 4, management system requirements, process safety performance indicators. There's a lot of specificity associated with those, and so there are quite a few differences. There are quite a few nuances that you need to be aware of. And if you're the PSM RMP CalARP coordinator, you'll want to make sure you have a careful mapping of what you're doing to these various requirements as outlined by Alex a few minutes ago. So these are located in different places in the regs. For the most part, the core requirements, the things that really are a lot of the technical work, are the same, but there are some nuances and some differences that you do need to be aware of. All right, so just to summarize, there have been a lot of agencies taking a fresh look at these safety management system programs. California refineries are the initial focus of these changes that we just went over, and these are state and also to the state PSM and accidental release prevention program requirements, again in California for refineries. The initial promulgation of these regulations harmonizes, and the regulators have used the term harmonize for this. They're not synchronized and they're not exactly identical, but they're not in disagreement either. There are just some have different requirements, slightly different requirements compared to the others. And as the coordinator, to make sure you maintain compliance, you want to be aware of that. Right now, because the federal changes that were proposed previously are currently under review, there's going to be no ability to really synchronize with federal requirements or really to do much of anything with that for some time to come. So if you're a California refinery, you're going to have to make sure you have a careful mapping of what things you're doing that conform to the federal RMP requirements, what things that you're doing that conform to state PSM requirements, and what things that you're doing as part of your safety management system program that conform to CalARP Program 4. Now, I told all the other facilities not to get too cozy. There is, right now, again, the focus is on California refineries. I've said that at least a dozen times to make sure there's no misstatements here or misapprehension. But even if you're not a California refinery, you need to be aware of what's going on, because you're going to see these things in literature. Your regulators are going to be talking about them, and you'll want to be able to justify what you're doing, that you don't need to do it there if somebody considers this as best practice or as a general duty for you. There is the potential, this has been stated by several regulators at presentations too, for later expansion of these kind of elements into other what are considered highly hazardous facilities in California. There's also the potential for expansion to non-California petroleum refineries. And if you're an owner-operator of a facility, of a refinery in California, and you have other assets in other parts of the United States, you want to make sure you've given careful consideration to making sure that you understand what the differences are and that you can justify not applying these things to other facilities. Again, it's not a regulatory requirement, but you want to be aware of it, and you want to be comfortable that what you're doing meets best practice standards. And of course, there's general duty cause correlations to all these things too. So again, not something that a non-California refinery needs to worry about right now, but you need to be aware of these requirements. Keep your eyes on the changing regulatory environment, and be aware that some of these things may be considered best practice at some point. All right, so what do you do as a process safety professional? Basically, you want to make sure you keep your eyes on the ball. Focus your efforts on ensuring the long-term success of your facilities programs. Make sure you can develop a strategy for effective implementation. You don't want to be doing rework. There's already so many things that you have to do anyhow. You want to do a careful mapping of what you are doing in terms of how it meets the requirements. Plan ahead. Be mindful of the fact that a lot of these new things people are going to be kind of stepping through that, even though to us, a lot of these aren't all that new because they're an extension of a good PHA. Basically, if you're doing a good PHA, damage mechanism reviews, hierarchy of hazard control analysis, and safeguard protection analysis are things that you think about all the time. And also be aware that some elements, inherently safer technologies, hierarchy of hazard control analysis, are best addressed early in the design stage if you are designing a new unit at your refinery. And obviously they're not only best done, but are also more cost effective, and you've got more options. So anyhow, that's our advice and guidance. I hope some of these materials are useful. I do want to let you know that you're not out there left hanging. There's no reason to be chasing your tail on these things. We've done a number of webinars over the past couple of years, helping people, hopefully helping people get prepped for these changes. We've provided a lot of technical guidance. In fact, specifically, one of our webinars, June 28th last year, went into all the nuances of the draft regulations at that time for doing a lot of these new requirements. And I don't believe there have been really any changes from those drafts, so they should be very useful to you. So there are webinars, we've done papers at GCPS, we've done also local seminars too. So there's a lot of materials out there that are available. Anything that we do, it's on our website, download for free, view the webinars. I hope they're going to be very helpful to you. Just don't chase your tail on these new requirements. There is a lot of guidance information out there. Also, I'd like to give you guys just a couple minutes to think about questions. Alex will join me on the podium, and I'll stand on my tippy toes so we can kind of be in the same screen. Um, Basically, what I'd like to do is invite Alex up for questions, and also let you know, the audience know, that there's some upcoming webinars that may be of interest. We're also going to be participating at the exhibiting at the RITA conference in Hershey, Pennsylvania, week after next. We got several webinars coming up that help emphasize good practices in HAZOP applications, ragged gap applications, and also standards for gas-fired heaters. So there's a lot of good stuff that we like to share with the industry as part of our technical outreach program. And that gave you 30 seconds to think of questions. So I'll go ahead and open up the floor for any questions that the audience might have.
Okay, so we have a few questions. The first question is, we have always done a thorough HAZOP study for our process units. Why is SPA now required?
Okay, all right, good question. So basically, the question was, if you've done a good HAZOP, why do you need to do an SPA? I think the emphasis here is on good. Not all HAZOP studies, PHAs, have been done to high quality standards. The application of layer protection analysis has been around for a decade and a half. Understanding potential for common mode failures between safeguards and initiating events, or safeguards and other safeguards, are things that a good HAZOP study should have already addressed, and a good facilitator drives the team to address. So if you've been doing a good job, it's really a very minor transition to do an SPA, but and we inherit a lot of HAZOP studies and PHAs where other people haven't done very good jobs. Not everybody does a great job, so they've really codified the SPA requirements, which are really a good practice for PHA.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, if CalARP Program 4 and Cal PSM for refineries are essentially the same regulation, why is there more than one agency providing oversight? Also, if they are essentially the same, why are requirements documented differently?
All right, so that's a good question. A lot of this is historical in nature. The question is basically, if you've got essentially the same regulation, why do you have multiple agencies? and why do you have even minor differences, and why aren't they totally synchronized? These are good questions. It really goes back into the history of these applications in California. Back in the 1980s, right after the Bhopal, India tragedy, we had a risk management and prevention program requirements in California, and those were spearheaded by the fire departments, which eventually became your administering agencies. So that was kind of a platform for getting a lot of these issues addressed. Roll the clock forward, and you've got the EPA and OSHA promulgating RMP and PSM respectively. And then, of course, CalARP program being developed to kind of synchronize with what the EPA was developing. So you've had a number of different agencies involved. They're all stakeholders in this, and they still feel it's important to be stakeholders in this process. And of course, you can never get 100% agreement on anything between two people, much less multiple people in different agencies. So you're going to have some minor nuances in terms of differences in the regulations, because people want to see different things, and they feel that it's important to get those things to adhere to their charters.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what are some suggestions that you can give us for performing an SPA, DMR, HCA, or IST as part of a PHA study?
I've been hogging it. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, SBA is pretty easy. SBA, most facilities already do LOPA as part of an SBA. And we've done an extensive number of webinars on how to perform LOPA as part of a HAZOP study. You can take a look at those. I won't go into too much detail on SBA right now. Like I said, that's a whole webinar in itself. DMRs, HCAs, ISDs, hierarchy of hazard control analysis, inherently safer technologies. Now that's a little bit trickier, but it's still doable as part of a HAZOP study. I guess there's a couple ways you can go about it. You can do a study in itself on how your hierarchy of hazard control of your system for each. You can do a HAZOP and then go outside the HAZOP, study each individual scenario as to how it can be designed better, how the whole scenario can be eliminated, and if it's a feasible thing to do. Or you can do it within the study. One thing I want to mention that's a good benefit for HCAs and ISDs is that you don't have to do it on every single scenario in your HAZOP study. You can pick only the major severity scenarios to perform this on. Now, once again, that's also a webinar in itself, and I believe we have a webinar on it. I believe it's HAZOP module number 10. If you go on our website in our webinar series, if you go to HAZOP module number 10, you can have a better understanding. You can watch that to get a better understanding on how to better do an HCA and ISD as part of a HAZOP study. And I believe we may try to do another webinar on it as we get more information in the future. Hope that answered your question. If there's any more questions, you can give me a call or send me an email, and we can discuss this further.
Yeah, actually, that kind of feedback is very helpful to us. Obviously we're practitioners in all these areas. We get out there and we're given challenges. We meet the challenge and work on these different activities. But in terms of this technical outreach, we try to identify the topics and things that we feel are helpful to folks. We do have a lot of recordings that should be able to help everybody through what we think are your needs for all these different items. But if you have suggestions, if you have other needs that aren't being addressed, go ahead and float them. Send them to somebody here, and it might be other people might benefit from it too, and it might be helpful for us in terms of making sure our own best practices get distributed internally. So suggestions are appreciated.
Okay, it looks like we have one more question here. I noticed that incident investigation requirements now suggest reviewing DMR, PHA, HCA, and SPA. What is the significance of that?
Okay. All right. Good question. So a lot of the different elements, when you're doing updates, they kind of bundle together damage mechanism reviews, hierarchy of hazard control analysis, safeguard protection analysis, and PHAs in terms of updating these things. They're bundled for a reason. When you look at damage mechanism reviews, metallurgy, piping specs, metallurgy of vessels and other equipment, when you're looking at hierarchy of hazard control analysis, are there ways to make the system inherently safer? When you're looking at safeguard protection analysis, whether you're applying LOPA or not, understanding is a safeguard an independent protection layer, and does the operator have time to respond? Is the alarm definitive enough? Does the relief valve have enough capacity? All these things are things that really a good PHA should have asked in the first place, and would have been part of, if you asked me a decade ago, doing a good HAZOP study, it'd be already part of a good HAZOP study. So all these things that revolve around PHA, and whether you want to codify them and give them specific element names or not, it's really all part of doing a good, getting a good understanding of your process hazards and doing a good PHA. So that's why you see them together a lot within the regulations when you're updating other elements, because really you're just trying to update your understanding of potential process hazards.
Okay, great. That's all the questions we have. Thank you.
All right, well, let me thank the audience. Appreciate your tuning in. If you do have some questions, just give us a call. Good day.
All right. Thank you, everyone.